Hello and welcome back to Mirror's Signal podcast. I'm your host, Josh Holleran, and today we are joined by Lee Jowett from Knowledgeablee Instructor Training. As always, with Lee, a really fascinating episode today. We were talking about the first two levels of the GDE Matrix, or goals for driver education. We covered a lot of ground in this episode, a lot of different topics from how our learners learn to what our thoughts are on the driving test and how we can prepare our learners for safe driving. This episode is the first of two. Lee has kindly agreed to come back and do a second episode on this. So this one is about the first two levels, the lower levels of the GDE. And then in a few weeks, there will be an episode going out on the higher levels of the GDE and what that looks like in the car. Before we get onto the episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about Talking Send with Dr. Julia Malkin, MBE. This is something that has been designed to help you help your learners with neurodiverse needs. So whether you've got learners with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, whatever it is, we've got a series of short videos on there to help and support you as a driving instructor. So go check that out. If you decide to sign up, you will get 25% off your first month for being a listener of the show. And the code you need for that is MSP25. And I'd like to give thanks to everyone that's been showing their support on Buy Me a Coffee. That's a page that I've set up for the show where if you wish, you can support the show and we can continue with the podcast and keep producing these episodes. So thank you very much for the guys that have been heading over there. So we'll now get on with the episode. I really hope you enjoy this one. And remember to subscribe, follow, whatever you do, wherever you're watching this, so that you can catch the next episode when that goes out in a few weeks. But enjoy. Lee, welcome back. How are you doing?
Hi, Josh. Yeah, I'm all right. As you know, I've been a little bit tired this evening. But yeah, that's after my 3 hours sleep. I'm feeling refreshed.
That's great. I'm glad you're refreshed for this. I wasn't going to mention that you overslept for a podcast episode with me, but now you've mentioned it and kept me waiting, it's going to be a late night.
Yeah, as I say, I'm so sorry. But yeah, woke up, looked at my phone, and Josh had been waiting 35 minutes. And I just woke up, so I had to wait another 10-15 minutes till I appeared. But I'm here now, so all's good.
Here. I tell you what, it's going to be a good link potentially to what we're going to be talking about. And I mean, we have students that do very similar, don't they? Roll out of bed, straight into a car. And as an instructor, we've got to, well, I use it as a great learning point for risk management. Are you fully with it? Now, you seem it, Lee. I reckon we can knock out a podcast straight after your nap.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'd get in the car and drive right now, but I reckon a podcast I'm fit to do.
So with the episode today, we wanted to talk a little bit about the GDE Matrix, goals for driver education. And we have spoke about it before, and I think it's going to be interesting to see it broken down and how we can discuss the different levels and where they fit in to our world as a driving instructor.
Yeah, well, that's a great way of looking at it. And you know, for those people that aren't familiar with the goals for driver education matrix, first of all, there are 12 elements really to the recognized model. There is a 5-level model, but it's not widely accredited, and to my knowledge, it doesn't come from the theory, which is why it's not accredited, which is the I can't remember exactly how it's worded now, but the basically a theory of driving behavior from the early 1980s from Keskinen and Mikkonen, who then updated it in 1996, and then as part of Gadget, it was turned into Matrix form. So you've got basically 12 elements. If you've not heard of it, if you've not seen it, you can find it on the theory of inner models of driving behavior. That's how it's worded. You can tell I've just woke up. But you can find the GDE Matrix readily online. You can find out plenty about it on Google, YouTube, etc. Knowledgeablee Instructor Training's Video Hub, and other places that are available. And Mirror Signal podcast. That's got a few podcasts about it.
And so listen to this before you go onto Knowledgeable's website.
But there are 12 elements, and as a driving instructor, to understand it, it might, if you're not familiar with it, it might work better to understand it from the lower levels first. But then, and we're planning to do this in two halves, really. So I'm not going to talk in too much detail about the higher levels. But then the important thing to understand is that it actually works from the top down. So that's about it, really. So and you probably see what I did there, because that's our strapline for our company. So taking a top-down approach to driving lessons. But as I say, we're going to try and focus as much as we can on the lower levels today. It's difficult because it's so integrated that it's difficult to stay totally in any one level without sort of going into the others. Like you mentioned, me being tired and fatigued, and the place for that in the education matrix is around level 3, because it's the person being tired, and level 3 is about the different contexts of journeys. And so whilst it's the person that's tired, which you would imagine is level 4, they won't always be tired. They're tired on that particular journey. So it's the context of that journey places it as a risk increasing factor in level 3. And then you've got how to cope with that, which would be in level 4. So, but I'll leave the higher levels.
Stay tuned to the podcast, because we are going to be delving into the higher levels. And like you said, your line for your company is the top-down approach. So it does seem a little bit odd that we're starting from the bottom and working up. But I hope it makes sense to everyone that's listening, because I think a lot of things that people struggle with when they're coming into the industry as training is a lot of things are focused on level 1 and 2, and the driving test is heavily focused on levels 1 and 2. So let's start there. There's 2 different columns that we've got to discuss, or 3. I don't know, columns, rows. I don't know. We've got the first
2 levels, 3 columns.
GDE. I always get them the wrong way around. Horizontal, vertical. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are they? What are the first 2 levels of the GDE matrix?
So first of all, just something that you mentioned, which I think is actually another thing for people to look at it, and a way of looking at it that can be helpful is if you look at, for example, where you'd start with a pupil. Well, first of all, it's about development, skills development. That's going to work from the bottom upwards. It's going to start at level 1 in terms of the skills that you're developing. But in terms of learning and where the pupils need to learn, that's the bit that should start at the top and work downwards, because it's the person that is learning and developing, and they're developing around the upper and lower levels of the GDE. So the lowest level, level 1, is vehicle control. And so when I say that in terms of the pupil developing, you cannot teach somebody to drive a car without them actually moving it. It won't work. So of course, as a starting point for their development, it's going to still start. Lessons will still start no matter how you approach, whether it's client-centered, whether it's a top-down approach to the GDE. It will start with moving off and stopping. The first thing the car will do is move off and stop if somebody's never actually done that before. So you've got the fact that there's a vehicle that needs to be moved. You've got then the knowledge and understanding requirements. That's the first column. So what does this person know and understand around controlling the vehicle? Our job is to help to facilitate their learning so that they have the necessary knowledge and skills that they need to control the vehicle. And as they develop that, then that's really where, as instructors in the past, we kind of, I'm going to generalize, not all. I'm sure there are some that did a really good job, but we kind of sold people a little bit short because we were too focused on rote learning. And so pupils got left in a stage of just remembering what they'd been taught to do without really having a great understanding of sort of what they're doing and why they're doing it and the purpose of what they're doing, and then the ability as you go higher up with your cognitive learning skills to then be able to analyze things for yourself and evaluate. And so this is all about the third column then of the GDE, which is to reflect and evaluate and self-evaluate and self-reflect on things, which creates those higher order cognitive skills that generally mean that somebody will understand their driving better. And then you've got, because we're going to touch on the driving test, you've got risk increasing factors. So again, I apologize because I've jumped between the three, but the first column is knowledge and understanding. The second column is risk increasing factors, which you might replace on the test as faults, and then the third one being evaluation. And so that would be level one really of the GDE matrix. It's our job to help the pupil to know and understand what they need to know and understand to control a vehicle safely, to look at their own risk increasing factors. And again, I'm going to sort of try and deter myself from going into what those risk increasing factors might be, because actually cause and effect, level one would look at the effect, and the higher levels probably particularly the further on people get in the learning, the more they develop into unconscious competence, the cause would be in the higher levels, and then you've got their ability then to evaluate.
So would an example of that cause and effect, if we're looking at it from a level one of the GDE, let's say a student stoles the car. If we just look at you've stoled the car and we assume it's because they've brought the clutch up too quick. You've just come up too quick on the clutch. Let's go and practice bringing the clutch up slowly, bringing it up slowly, getting the car moving. That's an example of the lower levels, and we've just seen a fault and we've fixed the fault. And that's hopefully our job done until we get back into the traffic and it happens again.
Yeah, and that's something to consider, because you've got the three elements there working, but the pupil stalled the car, and and stalling in and of itself can be a risk increasing factor, and certainly something that needs to be developed. It's something that, if it's an issue, needs to be fixed. And then you've got that all important third column, the ability of the driver to evaluate things for themselves. And what you've said is that what we would generally do with that is we'd evaluate it, and we'd take them away and we'd get them to practice lifting the clutch slower. And that, if the issue was psychomotor skill and a lack of development in that area, then we'd probably have got that right. We're most likely to be effective with that as a fix. But there are other reasons why somebody might bring the clutch up too fast. And so, particularly again, if you look at where your pupil is along their own development journey, if they've got the test next week and they're stalling it and you're still trying to remedy that with practicing with the clutch, then you're probably the one that's being responsible for that evaluation, and again selling your pupil short, because they need to consider what's causing them to stall the car, and then we need to try and help them to find a fix and a remedy for things like nerves and anxiety and dealing with pressure and stress and all sorts of things that human beings have to cope with as a driver.
And that, the example that we was talking about there, I mean, I might be wrong, but that's just moving the car. That's level one. How do we move a car? How do we stop the car? How do we control the car? How do we steer the car? It's physical skills in the car to make it go, make it stop. And that's level one.
Yeah, it largely is the case when you look at it, particularly, and I know we're going to talk about the driving test, but the way it's assessed on test, when you take it in isolation and you look at level one, and that's what the driving test does, is that it looks at the effect of what the outcome, but not the cause of the outcome. And so, yeah, taken in isolation, and it really highlights the issue with driver training, where we were post 2011 when the standards were published, 2014 when the standards check came in, and to this day, where we've still got situation where even the people in the highest positions in our side of DVSA do not understand the national standards and the purpose and the role. The scary thing is the role of a driving instructor as outlined in the national standards. So we're still, I think, not much further on than we were 10 years ago. We're slightly further on, which is not a bad thing at all. There are now far more new drivers on the road that, thanks to the work of driving instructors, in this industry, and I say thanks to the work, sincerely, because we've not been pushed far enough at all, in my opinion, by those that are meant to lead us. But the work of instructors in ensuring that the pupil takes some responsibility, and sometimes a lot, or often a lot of responsibility for that third column around levels 1 and 2. The ability to ask a pupil, what did you do well there? And what do you need to do to make that better? And how are you going to make that work? Those types of questions are essential for creating drivers who will do that quite naturally and normally as part of their just as part of their psyche as a driver, without it having to be something that is, an unconscious incompetence, something that they've not considered, so something that they don't do. And so that in and of itself is really good work. It's a benefit. The only other thing that generally we see that's changed is now pupils are asked if they want to be talked through something. And that's really about where we are, as a change from instructor-led approaches to what's deemed to be or supposed to be client-centered learning. But don't get me wrong, I think instructors at large have done a good job of taking on board as much as they've been given and putting it into practice. And I do think we will see the results and benefits of that, but it's very difficult statistically and research wise to actually see what the results are at this point.
I think one of the biggest challenges, and it comes up regularly on social media, if this client-centered learning thing works, why hasn't the pass rate gone up? And it seems you've got that side of the coin where it's like, well, we want to get students pass our driving test. And then you have the other people that are giving their opinion that it's not so much about that, it's after the driving test that is where we create safe drivers.
Mhm.
And for someone sitting or driving or whatever, listening to this, who is at the early stages of becoming a driving instructor or they've recently qualified, whatever, how do you sell that approach to a learner? Do we need to sell it? Do we draw it from the learner? Because a lot of people get in my car and expect me to tell them what they need to do to pass the driving test. How do you overcome that hurdle?
Oh, great question. As if there's one way of doing that. But no, great question. Yeah, first of all, just to go back to the initial point about instructors and taking it on board, and I think it's a valid point with regards to the driving test. I'm on the same page as you with that, in that it's not really about the test. What the issue with the test is that it's only really assessing the bottom two levels of the matrix, which we've always taught and educated around. It's taking things further for post-test driving. In theory, if it works really, really well, then it should push the pass rate up. But I'm not convinced that the majority of ADIs in this industry, in fact, categorically, I'll say right now that they're not addressing and impacting on the higher levels of the GDE. But what does impact on someone's performance on the test are really the things that sit in the higher levels of the GDE matrix. I was doing some training with Dr. Lisa Don last week, and she was talking about, she specifically mentioned and referenced the driving test, and we weren't doing specifically training around driving lessons and driver trainer skills in that sense, but it was one of the things that she cited in terms of the types of impacts that stress can have on a human being. And you put that level of stress onto a human being, I actually think the pass rate in and of itself is first of all, somewhere around 50%. And people might not like this, but it's the reality of putting that much stress under someone or onto someone, and asking them to perform a task that we're not designed to do anyway. We're not designed to take on board that much information at any one time, that many different sources of processing going on into the brain at any one time, and put stress and pressure, huge amounts, and to different degrees, because what sort of pressure are they under? With a 6-month waiting time, have they got a job that depends on it? What sort of social pressures have they got? Have they got a stream of friends that passed first time, or at least said they did, and so now they've got all of that social pressure? How have they coped in the past with tests? How do they cope with nerves and anxiety? What sort of experiences did they have as a child, etc.? And then they've got to go and deal with all of that with a typically middle to older age man that has got very limited social skills often, and decides whether he wants to use them or not on the day. And that person's got to deal with all of that at a very young age and get through a driving test. 50% roughly pass rate, in my humble opinion, is a feat of human capability. I think it's a wonderful achievement. 50%, 1 in 2 people going through that, going through everything they've been through in their lives, and actually just dealing with that and passing. So I would take the test and I would throw it out the window, because it is what it is. It's very limited in its focus, and it's very limited in the way that it's dealt with by the individual that is typically sat in the passenger seat. And then I'd look at beyond that, and the further development of pupils and why that's important. About the best research that we've got to date, but there's plenty of not directly related, but relatable themes within. Well, first of all, they did some training at Nottingham University using simulators, so sort of a little bit limited in their approach, but there was a finding that was useful, in that they took a group of people and they trained them in a traditional instructor-led training focus where they were told what to do, they were told how to do it, they were told what they'd done well, they were told what they hadn't done well, and they were told what they needed to do to fix it. And they went through the lessons in that way. And then when they passed the driving test, shortly afterwards, they were took into Nottingham University. They were put on driving simulators. And so, if I pause that there, they took a second group and they were trained in client-centered approaches. And so they were asked to figure things out for themselves more. They were asked to figure out what things they do well, what they don't do well, what they need to do to improve things for themselves. And when they passed, they were took into Nottingham University and placed on the same simulators. And so what they found with that is that first group, that were taught in an instructor-led approach, if they had a near miss and a close encounter with something, some point around the route, the simulator would throw in a very similar situation, and they'd typically react in exactly the same way as they did the first time. Whereas with the second group, once they'd come towards something and had maybe a near miss, second time round they were more likely, or most likely, I think is how it's worded, to adapt what they did from the first time. Because of course that's what they've always done. That's part of what they trained to do. So I think that is fundamental evidence. And then you've just got other things, what we know about the root causes of collisions and the fact that there is no link between post-test driving, skills-based training, and a reduction in collisions. There just isn't. You take somebody, yes, we need to learn to control a vehicle, to be able to drive a vehicle safely. But at that point, when you look at people at that stage that can drive a vehicle, there is no link between skills, developed skills, highly developed skills, and a reduction in collisions, because it's not a lack of skill typically that causes the collision. It is the things that are in the higher levels of the GDE, and educating people around that. I hope that answered that.
I mean, you've sold it to me. And I guess if we look at a simple way for me as an instructor, I've got a student 1 or 2 lessons in, and I'm asking, so what we're looking to develop today? And the response is, well, you're the instructor, you tell me what I need to do. Is there a way to manage that, or manage the student's expectations from me?
Brilliant. Yes, great, because I totally didn't answer. I did a DVSA response that didn't answer your actual question.
Unfortunately, you're stuck on Zoom with me.
No, because it is a good question. So I think that in the first instance, I think it's about developing a relationship with pupils. I see too much sometimes, quite often. Too many people being asked repeated, multiple questions that are just purely and simply knowledge-based. The answer could be found in the highway code. What's the speed limit on this road? Oh, I don't know. How might you know? The road markings. Well, yes, but there aren't any road markings. What else? No, you see, the thing is that what that does is it sort of fosters an atmosphere where your pupil isn't going to want to answer questions because we're scared of getting the answer wrong. So in the first instance, if your pupil says, well, you're the instructor, you tell me, my advice would be tell them. Then be very, very clever and ask them a question around what the thoughts are on it. Okay, well, I think the first thing that we should do today, then, if you're asking me, is how about we work on such and such? What's your thoughts on that? And it'll develop that relationship where their requests are valued. And whilst people don't always know the answer to knowledge-based questions, they're not going to know if they're asked on the first lesson, what would you like to do today? They're not going to know that, I mean, they might, but the chances of a 17-year-old getting in the car with an adult person at the start of a course of lessons and actually having the answer to that question, I would argue, are pretty slim. Even though they might know, if you dug on for long enough, you're going to break rapport straight away. So, okay, you're the instructor. You tell me. Well, if I'm right, what I think is that you've never moved a car before. No, I've never done that. Okay, so that'll be the starting point then. That'll be the starting point. We'll look at moving the car, and we'll look at stopping the car, and we'll get you doing that. What's your thoughts on doing that? They'll have an answer to that. That is not a question where you're going to get, well, you're the instructor, you tell me what my thoughts are on something. So yeah, I think it's communicating. You know, you mentioned before, I think we started recording, that you nearly phoned Mick and got Mick on. This is this is something that Mick came up with that I thought, yeah, it's a really good way of looking at it. Actually, use it quite regularly with PDIs. We used to use it. Well, we used to use it. I used to use it all the time with pupils. I've stopped teaching pupils. I still educate PDIs around the fact that we often overlook the fact that we're human beings in life, and we're human beings when we get in the car. And with our pupils, when things happen to them that cause them to do things with the car that they wouldn't normally do, it's about helping them see, what life is like for them outside the vehicle, and transferring and relating that back into the car. But also, Mick came up with a really good point on this, that it's the same for PDIs. They'll often struggle to hold a conversation as a driving instructor in ways that as a person in life, they won't struggle with at all. It's fascinating. You change the context, and suddenly things that are quite normal and straightforward for us become really, really difficult. So, not literally, but take yourself out the car, take your driving instructor hat off, put your human being hat on, and dig into things and communicate as a person rather than as a driving instructor, and it can be really, really effective.
That's a fascinating insight onto the communication skills for PDIs, which I'm sure there's going to be some PDIs listening to this that can relate. They can chat away all day long to anyone, put them in the car, and they have to find out what the student wants to work on or how the student's feeling. And I guess they're trying to find a specific question rather than just communicating with an individual and building a relationship. I'm surprised you've given Mick that one and not claimed it as your own, but we can edit that bit out for you.
Well, it is, to be fair, it is a taking mine further, but I'll give him credit for that, because I just thought, like, I'd overlooked that, and it's such a useful, it's been such a useful thing when I've pointed that out in that way. And you're right, it's absolutely that thing where we take ourselves from being a human being, and we get in the car, and suddenly we expect ourselves to be the expert. And I think the struggle really is that we're the expert in the knowledge and understanding, but we're not the expert in the pupil. They're the expert in themselves. And we stop communicating from person to person and start communicating from expert to learner. And and so it becomes a lot more difficult, and it actually works far better if you take that sort of hierarchy approach away and approach them like you would outside the vehicle. With regards to level 1 of the GDE, what it did for me when I did that, I took a coaching approach basically, is that the pupil developed far quicker because there was less input from me, because I wasn't coming at it from the perspective that I'm the expert. I was coming at it from the perspective that I'm there to help and help their learning and development, and they just developed so much quicker and longer lasting. I found that my pupils would go from, if they missed a lesson 1 week, they'd have forgotten, almost everything we'd done the lesson before, to they could miss 3 or 4 weeks. Somebody missed 3 months, and they were still exactly where they were, because it's deeper learning when you're learning in the way that a human brain actually does learn, through actually doing it and processing it itself, rather than trying to take on board information through the ears whilst trying to process information on the move.
Do you think that can come back to, again, context of the journey, I guess, context of what the PDI is doing? A PDI is trying to demonstrate knowledge. And this is me assuming, I don't work with many PDIs, but a PDI's got a part 3 looming. And they want to get that question right. They want to get the conversation right. And it's almost, I mean, yes, it's for the benefit of the student and the learner, but there's the thing in the back of their mind potentially that I need to be asking the right questions, because in 3 months there's going to be an examiner sat in the back, and am I asking the right questions? Rather than, because I'm sure, and I'd like to hear your opinion on it, if you're just having a conversation, it doesn't really matter how you word the question, as long as it's understood by you and the learner, and there's some development happening, because everyone responds differently anyway.
And I think what you've just said, really, if you're a PDI listening, listen back to what Josh has just said and take that as your approach. As long as the pupil understands, as long as the pupil understands what you've said, it's not about using all of these instructor terms and specific questions. It's about the pupil understanding the question and being able to run that through the minds and take it on board. And absolutely the case. I mean, it is what it is. People need time to develop. We absolutely have to, in my opinion, we have to put ourselves in that situation where we're trying to find the right question. You have to go through that. How are you going to get to the point where you can ask the right question if you don't put yourself in the situation where you're trying to ask the right question? But also, again, for PDIs, if you're experiencing that, be kind to yourself. You can't get to where you need to get to without putting yourself in that situation where you're trying to find the right question. But that's the problem, is like anything we do in life, when we're focusing so much on one thing, we just lose sight of other things. And one of the things that we'll most often lose track of is the pupil's actual answer. But practice it enough. Practice asking the right questions enough. Put yourself in that, in that pain for long enough, and you'll develop the ability to do that. And then at that point, that's when you really need to stop being a driving instructor and start communicating properly. Listen to the pupil. Don't worry about the words that you're using. And absolutely, one of the motivating factors for that kind of behavior will be the fact that, I've got my part 3 coming up, and it is quite a common theme and feedback from the examiner that was a really great demonstration of all of your knowledge being given to that pupil. Unfortunately, that's not what I was looking for. Yeah, and it's that, that thing where we want to put on a show and show all of our skills and all of our knowledge and understanding, but it's understanding that our role is to let the pupil shine. It's about us facilitating them, giving all the right answers, doing all the right things. When they do something wrong, showing how well that they can, figure things out for themselves, and we come in where we need to. And if we do that, and if you do that as a PDI on part 3 or an ADI on standards check, you'll actually, despite having less input, your score will be much greater.
That's why I failed my first part 3.
Mm.
I wanted to show the examiner everything I knew, and I was going to tell it to this pupil, and it went wrong, as you can imagine. And yep, I failed. Pupil was overwhelmed.
Mm.
No real learning took place. She was stressed as well because there was an examiner in the back. Loads of things, but my initial thought was I need to show the examiner everything that I know and how I'm going to do this. And I've said it a few times on the episode. We show our, or we should be showing our theoretical knowledge
Mm.
at part 1 stage. We should be showing our practical skill and ability at part 2. We've proven ourselves.
Mm.
Now we've got to communicate with our learner. But we've deviated way off topic. So we've done level 1 GDE.
Yeah, yes.
I'm gonna do what I should be doing, and that is, let's bring us back to before we end up on another route to wherever this takes us. So can we move on to level 2 of the GDE? What's level 2?
So again, this is really the way to look at it, in that what am I going to develop my pupils around? Well, you're going to develop your pupils' skill in terms of control of the vehicle, level 1, and then you move that onto the types of junctions and carriageways that they will need to deal with as a driver. This is why these 2 elements are what's assessed on a driving test. So you've got the knowledge and understanding requirements to navigate the vehicle around different types of roads, single carriageways, dual carriageways, rural roads, motorways as an ADI with your pupils, but not on test, roundabouts, traffic light junctions, etc., etc., crossroads, T-junctions, all of the things, all of the types of junctions that your pupils will need to navigate in life. And again, then you've got, we need to really facilitate their learning around the knowledge and understanding that they need. Risk increasing factors in terms of, what can increase risk when you're navigating the vehicle, what did increase risk in that junction, and then their ability in the 3rd column to evaluate their own performance throughout that journey. So that's really level 1 and level 2 in terms of what we're supposed to be educating. And as a skills development, you wouldn't, for example, if you take those 2 in isolation and go, well, it should work from the top down, you wouldn't take somebody onto the motorway without the ability to control the vehicle really well. So there's the argument that, well, that can't work, but it's this skills development which kind of works from the bottom up, but then there's learning, and the learning is from the top downwards. So you have to separate and understand the difference between skills development, knowledge and understanding, and actually what we need to be helping people learn around, which is, when you look at it, a level 4, 3, 2, 1, because they're the things that's the order in which it would be. It's the hierarchy of a driver, really. It's the order in which one would impact on the other.
There's something that's flying through my head, and I think I've mentioned it on a previous episode, but I might not. So here goes. What's standing out to me at the minute? I took my little boy to Legoland a few years ago for his birthday to get his Legoland driving license. And you chuck 20 children on this makeshift track with
Mm.
junctions, traffic lights, roundabouts. I learned a lot from that I've taken into my lessons, but they had no lessons. They had no safety brief, really. A bunch of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, whatever, all jumped into these cars.
Mm.
And there was children stopping at red lights. There
Mm.
was children going around
Yeah.
roundabouts.
Mm.
There was very few bumping into each other.
Yeah.
And I just, the image I've got in my head for like level 1 and 2 is like, this is how you stop the car. This is how you make it go. Here's some junctions. Go this way around the junctions. Look both ways before you go across. And half an hour later, whatever it is, I've got a printed driving license for my little boy that he's got hung up in his wall. And it sounds like these are the basics that we need skill wise to take this tool on the road. To take that vehicle on the road, we need to know how to stop it, set it off, drive it around a bend, understand the junctions.
Mm. I
And that's what's
totally,
being looked at on a driving test.
yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. I've long held the opinion, and worked under the assumption that if you could give somebody the vehicle for long enough, that they could control the vehicle really well to the stage that we're at as drivers, where we're unconsciously competent in what we do. We don't have to think about it. It's intrinsic. It's muscle memory. There'd be very little for a driving instructor to do. We'd just knock out the fine details. And so I think largely the battle that we've got as instructors with regards to level 1 and 2 is having suitable places to get them in control of the vehicle. Because I think once they've got that, just like you're saying, is that it wouldn't take too much for them to suddenly be doing the things that they need to do. There'd be little things like, exact positioning and the specifics, and maybe in terms of what they see others doing, like sitting in lane 2 on a dual carriageway rather than driving in lane 1. And so, the knowledge and understanding requirements of the highway code that aren't generally followed. But yeah, very, very little, and that's I love that that Lego thing. It's fascinating. Isn't it? It's fascinating that kids at the age of 5 and 6 actually know and understand, the general principles of driving a vehicle from what they've already observed, and that's at that age. They're not even anywhere near, the age of driving a vehicle yet.
The strangest thing I found watching that, and hopefully this helps a few people for what it really helped me with, there was very few of these children overshooting junctions, understeering, oversteering. And don't get me wrong, they're going slow. They're not doing 20 miles an hour, changing gears and everything else. They're going quite slow. But their head was always moving.
Yeah.
It was always moving. And then when I started watching my students and they can't quite get the angle right on the road, and I'm like, you're not looking where you want to go. You're looking out of this windscreen that's straight in front of you, and we need to be looking out of the side window because that's where we're going. And rightly or wrongly, that's how I picked that up as an ADI.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm trying to help these learners, and it just made so much sense when I was watching these kids. I'm like, why are they not crashing? Why are they not hitting the tire wall? How are they keeping their position? And they're just looking around. Where are people? What's going on? And I think it comes back to context. They're children. They've not built fear yet the way a 17, 18-year-old has, that's now in a 1.5 tons of metal. And they're like, I could hurt someone here. And it's like, well, we're on a nursery route. There's no one here. And I've got some brakes. But it doesn't remove their feelings of the situation and how they're going to manage it. So we're going to try and not stray too high on the levels of the GDE. But it is fascinating. And I've got students that have taught themselves to drive and now going legit, and they need a driving instructor to teach them how to drive. And that is a bulk of the conversation. Why are you doing this? And they've taught themselves to drive illegally, but now they want to go straight and they want to get a license. Life's changed for them. And it's been a really interesting journey working with those people because you're right, they've picked up skills, they're riding the clutch constantly, they're quite close to the vehicle in front, they're breaking speed limits and understanding why. They just want to fit in with the traffic. They don't want to stand out and be the person doing 30 when everyone else is doing 35 because they're, in their opinion, going to be the ones that get picked out and get pulled. Why are you going at the speed limit and no one else is? Understanding their thoughts has been quite a lesson for me working with these people.
Yeah, and again, without trying to go into really too much of high level, but motivators, motives, and motivations. Well, what do we know about what motivates human beings? One of the highest motivators for a human being is esteem and self-esteem, and the need for us to be accepted by others and valued by others, and to drive in a way that people will accept, and it's a subconscious thing. If you're driving in a way that's dissimilar to everybody else, then by definition you're driving in a way that isn't accepted by others, and we have that absolute desire as human beings. One of our strongest needs is to be accepted. So all kinds of things. We just get worse at learning. When your pupils get something wrong at the age of 17, oh, that's so embarrassing, I never want to do that again, oh my god, I want to die. When they're 5, 6 years old and they get something wrong, they have a little giggle and they go and do that again, and they're wired to just trial and error and get it wrong and let's do that again until I get it right. And we lose that ability, like you say, because we develop these experiences through life of getting things wrong, and we build that fear response in terms of what happens to us when we get things wrong, and that impacts on what we do and how we react to it. So with regards to level 1 and 2, probably I think if we both take a look at what we've said, it would probably be easier for us to teach 5-year-olds.
Yeah. I suspect it would, but this gives me another question. Like, with that fear of making those mistakes, because it seems to be most students now, I don't know whether it's schooling, I don't know whether it's age, I don't know whether it's society, but what can we do as an instructor to help the learner get through that initial stage of not wanting to make mistakes, not wanting to give you the wrong answer? And how do we get over that?
So if we keep it around the lower levels of the GDE, then first of all, one of the things that I've kind of already touched on really is that don't push for the right answer. If you're constantly asking questions of the pupil, looking for a particular answer, and you realize you're not getting the answer, change your method of questioning. Rather than asking them what they did wrong, where what the answer to that is, ask them, do they know why that happened? What caused them to do that? That's an answer that you won't know. And so there's no wrong answer to that. Really, it's and some people that listen to this may have seen, but we put out an approach to teaching. It's an approach to teaching. It's not what to teach. It's really how to teach. It's the approach that we need to take as an industry, because learning is developmental, and for our age demographic, it must start with what they know. It must start with everything. Every element of the training process should take a factor of what do they know about it? What do they know about what they know? What do they know about what they don't know? That might sound like a question where you'd get, well, I don't know, do I? But you don't. what do you know about what you don't know about that? Well, it's such and such that I don't know. It's that, and what I don't know about it is, and so that approach to teaching, where we start the communication around what they know, that means is that we're actually pulling our pupils up on a regular basis because something's gone well. We're pulling them up on a regular basis because something's gone just all right. We're pulling them up on a regular basis because something's gone great. And we're pulling them up on a regular basis because that didn't go the way I wanted it to. Rather than pulling people up on an only basis to see it, say it, sort it, suss it, because somebody got something wrong. Well, of course, then we're going to get that fear response. Every time we pull up, and you see it, I see it, because I'll be sat with a PDI and they'll pull the pupil up, and the first thing the pupil says is, I did that wrong, didn't I? They've entered that fear response. And because the only time they're ever getting pulled up is because they've done something wrong. It's an approach to teaching that we really need to change quickly. It's not effective. Reinforcing positive behavior, that's what actually motivates people to keep maintaining. And also, by the way, it's our job to teach them. That's our job. They got it wrong. Well, yes, of course, they can't drive. They're actually paying us to teach them to drive. Yeah, but they got it wrong. Yes, they can't do it. Do your job and help them to learn rather than telling them they got it wrong. Of course they did. For a start, they're a human being trying to drive a car, and they will continue to make mistakes in the future. It's inevitable. They would just do that. It will happen. And then, additionally, that's what they're paying us for. And instead of helping them to learn, we're telling them they've got it wrong and asking them, what could happen if you get that wrong? Well, I could kill someone. Yeah. Well, think about that. I don't want to kill someone. I just want to learn how to do it properly. So, yeah, we have to look at our own approach, really, and consider, are we helping people to develop around what they already know? Are we helping them to understand what they know? And are we helping them to fill in the gaps in areas where, just as they would when they were children, they try something, it doesn't work, they look at it and go, how can I do that different? And they try that. We just have to do that safely.
We've covered a lot of different levels of the GDE at that point there, with some focus on level 1 and level 2. But I think from the conversation that we've had there, you can see why people are a little bit unsure, especially at PDI stage, when there are different programs that different schools are following, that different instructors are following. And you see it quite a bit around the faults and making mistakes. But what stood out when you were saying that was the overall message of a lesson. I've made a mistake there. Oh no. Opposed to, that didn't quite go to plan. What can we change?
Yeah.
To go and do it again? And it's almost like the first example is driving out of fear. They're not driving to develop. They're driving to not make mistakes for our benefit as the driving instructor. Whereas the opposite, the other side, is they're driving to experiment. What works? Did it work? Why didn't it work? Can we go again? And can I try this? And it's a completely different dynamic in the car, which is setting off on the right foot or potentially the wrong foot and a fearful one.
100%. Yeah, it's a a great little sort of simplification of that probably 5-minute rant. But no, absolutely 100%, because they are learning. It is our role to help them to develop. And how do human beings learn? Well, really, it is a case of we try things. We then think about whether they worked or not and what worked. And if we facilitate that really well, then they'll have a really good understanding about what things work for them and what things don't work for them. And yes, we have to keep the car safe. Yes, that's our role. But it's, again, as you put it there, it's the approach that we take. And fundamentally, the approach of this industry to developing learners is just categorically wrong, and it isn't one that will work. Even with regards to the lower levels of the GDE, and like you said, that all we're doing really is developing a culture where the pupils trying to get it right for us and not for themselves, and they have to figure all of those things out around level 1, controlling the vehicle, and around level 2, what they're doing in particular junctions, really when they've passed the test, because that's when they'll need to learn, how do I want to do this, as opposed to how do they want me to do this.
And it certainly shows, like with my learners that have been driving for years illegally, the levels 1 and 2, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing on the road, but they're doing it. And they've had quite a few lessons with me now. There are a couple that I'm working with, and they're getting there ready for the driving test, but they have just taught themselves how to start the car, how to stop it, how to go around a junction, how to navigate all of these different roundabouts that we have, spiral roundabouts, the multi-lanes. But it's just kind of follow the car in front, and I might go where I want to go. I might go off somewhere else, but we're going to go. So I think that's a really good look into the first 2 levels of the GDE matrix, along with many references to the higher levels and the importance of it. But if we've got a PDI that's receiving training and they're listening to this and wanting to, I don't know, develop and understand a little bit more, how can they do that? What should they be looking for within their training? Like, because different trainers have different approaches, and it's difficult to know whether what you're getting is setting you up for the best way it can for part 3, or whether it's, I'm just going to go straight out there, outdated training that's based on the old system that's maybe been tweaked for the part 3. What should you be looking for as a PDI? What are some of the indicators?
Okay. Again, I'm not going to go too much off on a tangent, but the way you worded something earlier was actually really, when you put it into context, it is the purpose of the GDE matrix. And you mentioned that your pupils, those that have self-taught, and I would say, largely just people in general, and those that really aren't educated around the higher levels of the GDE, certainly don't know why they're doing what they're doing. That's the purpose of the Goals for Driver Education matrix, is that when the pupil leaves the course of lessons, they know why they're doing what they're doing as a driver, and that touches into the higher levels, which we'll go into. That being said, PDIs really, and this isn't trying to do a discredit to PDIs. I remember going through that process, and wow, and now I see PDIs on a regular basis, and often when they're very early on their trainee licenses, on the first trainee license in the first month, you're dealing with someone who can't drive a car being taught by someone who can't teach. And there might be an argument that continues into, but there's teaching to a degree where we can both help someone to learn and keep the car safe, and that PDI's got to be doing things like we've talked about already, like thinking about the right question, thinking about where they're looking, thinking about what they're doing. So it's a very difficult job to pick up and develop all of those skills whilst trying to teach someone who can't drive, in a way that you're trying to learn to do at the same time, surrounded by people that that can drive, that have very little care for you being in their way. So with PDIs, I just think you got to give yourself time. You got to be kind to yourself. You got to give yourself time to develop. What should you be looking for? Well, if I keep it to, because there's what should we be looking for overall, and realistically, what should we be looking for? Because the two can differ to some extent, because realistically, as an industry where we are with regards to the GDE Matrix and client-centered learning, is that as an entire industry, we're not where we should be. So I could mention things that really, really aren't realistic. If I keep it to what's realistically expected and necessary for a part 3 and to get through, what do you need to be good at? You need to be a very good observer of the driver. So a lot of your training should include being trained around just simply observing the driver and what's happening outside the vehicle. So training, and initially I would say the best way to do that is to separate the two. So you focus on outside the vehicle. Commentary is really, really useful. Commentary on what is happening outside the vehicle, and then commentary on what they should be doing inside the vehicle. So the eyes, the hands, the feet, and then matching those things together as you do more and more commentary. But it develops those essential skills of being able to observe well, because you have to unlearn being a passenger and a driver, observe well the surrounding areas, and know when to switch your attention to the driver, the person that's going to kill you in the driver's seat, potentially, if you're not very good at observing them. And then largely, the ability to, which is where the second half of that comes in, to know what you'd be doing, to be conscious in your own driving. So you should be doing lots of work on observing, lots of work around commentary to bring your own driving back a stage from unconscious to consciously aware of your own actions is easier for teaching. Then you should be looking at skills rather than junctions and topics, because you can develop your own topic knowledge. You can do that. You don't need somebody to teach you how to teach turning right in traffic light junctions. Commentary, for example, and if you take that, the ability to talk yourself through what's happening outside and inside the vehicle, and talk yourself into a junction in terms of outside the car, and talk yourself through what you're doing as a driver inside the car, then you develop the ability to instruct somebody into a junction. So if you're spending thousands of pounds and what you're getting is, this is how to teach junctions, that for me is a waste of money, because actually you need to have the skills that you need to teach it. Communication. How do I communicate? Can I instruct? Can I observe? Can I know when to back off with the instruction? Do I know what's effective for instruction? Can I question at the right times? Do I know when I should be questioning? Do I, can I combine observing the pupil with asking, and this is the difficult thing, but you have to give yourself time to know the right question at the right time. And then, if I was to go into other things that are really important, but unfortunately, really, really sadly, not so important for part 3, which saddens me saying that, but it is, it is what it is. But understanding the human side of drivers, the side of drivers that will, ultimately lead to collisions, and helping the driver to understand that for themselves. I would hope that most training companies are touching on that to some extent. But yeah, if what you're getting is topic focused training. Let's go and teach you how to teach roundabouts to somebody. Then there are things within that will help you. Don't get me wrong. There are things in there that you'll need, but you're probably going to need a bit of additional training around it to get you from where you are at the end of that to where you need to be to deliver client-centered learning lessons.
Some really great points there, and focused on the skills of an instructor opposed to the skills of a driver. And not the skills of a driver, the topics that are needed to be a driver. I guess it's you see it. It's on socials. I tried beating around, and it's like, let's get to the point. If someone's receiving training, and there's some great things there that people can take that are watching or listening very early on in their journey, where they've done 10, 20, 30, 40 hours, whatever it is. Is it what you need to be receiving to be the best or get the best out of the situation that you can, ready for part 3? There's some great points there. Thank you for that, Lee.
Oh, thanks. Probably Mick's probably responsible for that.
We'll give credit to Mick for that one.
Yeah.
Are there any other points on levels 1 or 2 that you would like to discuss, or that we need to delve into anymore?
I'd like to finish that a little bit by the driving test. Driving test will assess level 1 and 2. It's all it's capable of assessing. I have heard examiners claim that they assess to level 3 because they put a sat nav on. No, not really. Although the test itself, the biggest learning point for me around the driving test is level 3, and the impact on level 4. But the driving test doesn't go into that. We'll go into that when we discuss the higher levels. The driving test looks at the pupil's knowledge and understanding and risk increasing factors around controlling the vehicle and controlling the vehicle in traffic through different types of junctions. And at the end of it, it's the examiner that does the evaluation. And that model of teaching, of testing, has impacted on, and it always will be the case, because it always is the case in any training environment that has a test at the end of it. That will always influence the training program and what, the contents of that training program. It's just a fact of life. What is the issue with that? It gets people through test. What is the issue with that is that research going all the way back to 1980 tells us that the vehicle, the roadway, and the environment, the vehicle level 1, the roadway, and the environment level 2 are not the principal cause of collisions. So it's not assessing anything that really is considered to be a principal cause of a collision. And that's where we must take people's education further, so that we are addressing the principal cause of collisions and helping them to be more aware of them as a person for when they're driving independently.
Creating safer drivers, thinking drivers.
Safe driving for life, DVSA.
That's their bit done.
I'm a disciple of DVSA.
So on that, because I'm sure we're going to stray into the higher levels again, and we're going to do another episode on that. You've kindly said you will come back and we'll delve into levels 3 and 4. So guys, stay tuned for that episode. I'm sure it won't be long after this one airs. But I have some questions for you, if we can fly through some of these from some of the listeners. Do you mind if we go through it?
Yeah, no, God, no, not at all.
So I'm going to load them up. Where are we? There we go. So the first couple of questions, let's get this on record, because I like where this question goes. So Penny Sue Alexander, she's asked, what reason did you and Mick decide to kind of build the partnership that you have?
Hi, Penny. Thanks for that question. I think just out of desperation. Um, no, there's many different reasons. But I think anyone um, that that's experienced us um, will know that we're both very, very passionate about what we do. So we share, um, you know, um, we share the same passion about, you know, being the best that we can be, and trying to be the best that we can be, and then further to that, wanting to. Although I was told by good friend Stuart Lockery last week that it's not wanting to, it's needing to, and actually I agree with him to the need to try and develop and take the industry further. Trying to improve ourselves, trying to improve what we do, and trying to develop and create things that develop the industry. So I'm not sure that they were all exactly the reasons why we initially got together, but I think what probably brought us together is that we both respected what we were doing. We both respected and valued each other's approach to and passion for the industry, and also, however it's sort of work, whether it's by luck or judgment, we both each other's strengths sort of can cover for each other's weaknesses. So yeah, and probably more in the way that makes strengths cover for mine. Organization being one of the things that just an absolute weakness of mine that well, as you've experienced this evening. So
Well, that brings us on to the next one then. What's been the hardest thing to overcome? So this follows on Penny's question, still going. What's been the hardest thing to overcome?
I'm going to be really honest in that with regards to the business, there's not I've not been yet, touch wood, there's not been anything that's been difficult to overcome. But writing courses and workshops takes time. You need time. When I was, or when we were developing the workshops and things that we've developed, we were also at the same time working more hours, working with pupils still, and like now I'm in a far better place to develop more things, which is what we're looking at for next year. But so yeah, so I would say maybe that was quite difficult, but you don't realize it at the time. It's just part of what's going on in your life. It took longer to develop the workshop initially than we'd hoped. So I think it was supposed to sort of go out in April, and we ended up running the first one on. Oh, and the other thing that yeah, me and Mick, our wedding anniversary is the 10th of June. That was the day we first ran our very first workshop, and we're not married to each other. Like, I always say we're not Bert and Ernie, but it's just another funny coincidence is that we shared the same wedding anniversary, and it's the date that we first ran our standards check and client centered learning workshop. The most difficult thing to overcome, we've not overcome, and I'm still hammering away at it and trying to make an inroad, because I have to justify the training that I deliver in terms of DVSA, and their absolute refusal, in my opinion, to acknowledge the national standards for driver and rider trainers in terms of their own knowledge, understanding, training, and assessments. In that it's almost like they're looking down the nose at us and saying you need to know the national standards, when categorically they don't know and understand it themselves. So that's been the hardest thing, because it really is difficult to motivate yourself at times to keep going with something that you really believe in, when ultimately it's massively impacted by those that are supposed to, really motivate you to be better. So I would say DVSA has been the hardest one. Creating workshops takes time, but I really enjoy it. Developing, those things, and we just keep going.
Love that. The DVSA, I think, is everyone's biggest battle at the minute at any stage of being a
Yeah,
driving
true.
instructor.
True, and I feel for them. I feel for them in some respects with regards to, the L tests are in a situation that they didn't ask to be put into. There isn't an easy answer. I don't care what anyone says. There really isn't, and there isn't an easy answer. There isn't an answer. I don't know what they're
It's not
supposed to
going
do
anywhere.
about it. Now, I mean, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? You've got, I don't know, you got £5 and you need £500,000. Well, yeah, you've not got it. What do? You can find ways to make a bit more money, but ultimately getting to £500,000 is going to be very, very, very difficult and take a long, 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 long time. So, so I feel for them on that aspect, but there are other aspects of what they do that's just blatantly on them.
And could be changed.
Yes.
But we're not going to create another episode out of that just yet. Let me get this kicks back up again for 2025, and maybe towards the end of the year we'll see if we can get the DVSA on with you.
oh. Oh, yeah,
So
painful.
we'll carry on from Penny, and we'll try and get through these potentially a bit quicker, but they need the information, and if you're happy to share. If someone else wanted to start a similar project to what you guys have done, what would you suggest?
I would suggest. Oh, that's a great question. That Penny again.
Yeah. This is all Penny so far.
Oh, what a
You got a
great.
list coming.
Oh, she's brilliant, Penny. So, what a great question. I'd make sure that that you get on with the person that you're going to work with, because you're going to spend a lot of time working with them. Make sure that you share the same values, because that will come out, absolutely. If you don't, me and Mick, our values are massively aligned. Make sure you for me, this is just me speaking from my perspective. When or before I started putting myself out there as a trainer, I really needed to be in a position where I didn't just know things to the extent that I could recite what I'd been told. I can run them through my brain, and I can apply them to different things in different ways. It's higher order cognitive skills, the ability to analyze, evaluate, and create new learning based on all of the knowledge and understanding that you've got. If I'm honest, I think we should all be there. If we're going to be trainers in this industry, we should be at that level of learning where I can talk about the GDE. You can ask me a question, I can run it through my head, and I can go bing, 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 that, and that. And what it means in that sense is this and this. And it's not something that I've been told. It's just that level of knowledge and understanding that really you need if you're going to be taking that and training somebody in it. It's not enough to simply just be able to repeat what you've been told by somebody else.
So in answer to that question, I think is understand your area, your field at the higher level.
Take time, not from the first point of making that decision, but make that decision at a point where you've had time. I think for me, I think the amount of time was a lot longer than other people need, but it's part of what I know about myself, that in order to be comfortable in something, I need to. It's why for my first 3-hour sessions with my trainer as a PDI, all I could get out of my mouth was, "I'm so sorry, I'll do the next one." and and so I must have spent the best part of 9 hours just saying that. And it's it's the same. It's the same thing. Now that doesn't mean that's the same for everybody, but it is the case for me. Before I open my mouth and sort of put something out there, I need to fully understand it and be able to run it through my brain. But I think at least to some extent, you don't want to be in the industry for for maybe 3 months and be deciding to train people. You get the knowledge and understanding. Go and get yourself immersed in developing your own knowledge and understanding. Immerse yourself in it, because the one thing that I would say I've enjoyed more than anything else being in this industry is the amount of things that I've learned through teaching, but through training and then teaching, through putting things into practice that I've learned. Yeah, it's great, because the minute you know how much you don't know, that's when the fun starts to happen.
So this isn't Penny's question, but I'm gonna delve a little bit because I know Penny. I guess you know Penny. She's been on the
Yeah, I know Penny.
podcast.
Yeah.
So many courses, so much knowledge.
Yeah.
So I guess with this, if we could look at it from a business point of view as well, you said about yours and Mick's, kind of your strengths and weaknesses have worked with each other and your values are aligned. Is there any kind of business advice you get? Maybe just 1 or 2 points if someone's looking at wanting to build, I don't know, something similar or offer group training somewhere, business wise, if that's a partnership, maybe 1 or 2 pieces of advice you would give to someone at the early stages of that.
Yes. Don't rush into starting the business. We first discussed the business 12 months before we launched it. We met on a regular basis from there, just putting the foundations in place, ideas for what we wanted to do. We put a business plan in place for the first 3 years, and I think we've hit nearly every. Well, I know we've hit nearly every target on there. I think we might have hit every single target, although there might be one that we've missed, and we've added some other things in as well. So we had kind of a developed business plan before we actually started the business, and although you want to give yourself a rough outline and time frame, accept that things might need to be pushed back a little bit, and be accepting of the other person when their timescales go from April to June, because we're very appreciative of that.
I don't know what happened then. I'm choking. So we've got another one now from Tarek. Now, he's sent over quite a few questions, and some of them are around the DVSA and the issues that we're facing. But one, maybe if you could give us a couple of points, we'll go for three key points from Lee on why the Part 3 pass rate is very low. Why do you think the Part 3 pass rate is low? 3 points.
First point, that I think time. I was speaking to the registrar last week at the DIA conference, and they're looking at ways to develop the qualification process, and with regards to one of your interests, Josh, and I know I'm confident that you will be on board with this, is that they're looking at ways of creating a better process from Part 1 into Part 2, and Part 1 into Part 2 into Part 3. So I think that the process at the minute isn't quite right. The structure isn't quite right. And I think that will be a big part of, or a big factor in the pass rate. Second point, time. I was speaking to the registrar, and I said to him, that my view is that when I'm seeing people on a second trainee license, you see a huge difference. You see someone 3 months into the second trainee license, compare that to 3 months on their first trainee license, and it's kind of night and day. They can still be doing, in terms of the questions, the same things. The lesson can look the same way, focused on junctions, MSPSL. The pupil gets something wrong and they jump from what went wrong to what can happen if you get it wrong. But what you see is somebody that's aware of what the person's doing far more, that's not as conscious in what they're doing, that's managing risk better. So I think time would be something. And then I think thirdly and most importantly, the best, and this is more advice really, but it's advice that I would give in terms of improving the pass rate. If you're a PDI coming into it and you haven't got like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 folders full of your own research, your own development, your own part 1 stuff, you haven't looked at part 1 and gone, right, well, what does that actually mean? And how does that fit into? And you haven't took your part 2 and really looked at your part 2 from the point of view of, this is what I'm going to be teaching for my part 3, making, notes of what I'm doing and how that, and am I starting to really understand my driving now? And then your part 3 and, and a file, and ultimately files and files full of your own notes that you look back on, recordings, lesson observations with your trainer, feedback from your trainer, everything put together, then you're probably a large part and a large reason behind your own failing.
So we've got ways to improve the pass rate and why the pass rate is quite low. That lack of, I guess, preparation, whether it's the individual, the PDI, whether it's the trainer that's supporting them. Some really interesting points there. Next question, and I had to get specific on this one. You might have seen it. What changes do we need for the driving test to reflect the challenges that people face in 2025? And I guess this is a bit of a hypothetical one, but some of the things that he's mentioned, this is Stefan. So we've got increased number of vehicles on the road and it's more hazardous with poor road markings. We've got increased number of anxiety disorders amongst young adults. And then the high percentage of new drivers involved in KSIs on rural roads. So I guess looking at this, those points, and I don't know about you, Lee, maybe you want to give an answer. They seem different. The first one is, what changes do we need to see in the driving test? I don't think we'll ever see that. But the points that Stefan's then gone into, I think are things we need to be aware of to create safe drivers. So yeah, make of that what you will. See your interpretation of it.
Yeah, no, I think the last thing that you said is absolutely the way I'd look at it. That the things that we need to be aware of as driver trainers, 100%. It's such a great question, Stefan. Someone that as a recently qualified ADI, his passion and desire and desire to develop and improve is reflected in, I think, the quality of that as a question. If I look at the test itself, if I'm honest, it probably serves its purpose, because it's not a training situation. It's not there to develop people's knowledge and understanding. It's there to assess somebody's competence to control and drive a vehicle. It's just that it's unfortunate, but in life, it just turns out to be that that testing or training models that have a test at the end of it are massively influenced in general This isn't saying that it's across the board, but in general, it will absolutely be the case. It's the case in every industry that has a testing element at the end of a training element. So I think to a large extent, although there are things, and Stefan's right to point out some of the things that he pointed out, there are things that they could do to slightly better their assessment in terms of people's ability to multitask, people's ability to use while still being responsible and acting responsibly around different vehicle technologies, the use of adaptive cruise control, for example, whilst also maintaining, responsibility for the vehicle, maybe whilst also following sat nav, etc., etc. So yeah, I'm sure there are ways that all of these things can be implemented, but ultimately, I think the test itself probably serves the purpose that it needs to. License acquisition. Then it goes to us as trainers to really just, if I was to keep it as simple as say, yeah, absolutely 100% agree. Those things that were mentioned, that were outlined, are things that we need to raise people's awareness of.
Nice. It's difficult, isn't it? We have spent the episode talking about why we need to be taking people further than the driving test and further than levels 1 and 2 of the GDE. And then we've almost finished saying, or you have finished saying, driving test is all right. It does its job. It serves a purpose.
Mm.
And I guess that can sometimes be taken. My brain's off on one now. The driving test is the standard that we need to reach. And the moral of today's episode is we need to be reaching further as instructors. That's a minimum to get a license. And it shouldn't be the bar that we set as a trainer.
100%. Yeah, 100%. As an industry, we should take at face value the fact that the test is about license acquisition, and within 40 minutes, they can assess so much, and that's got to be based upon, is this person doing the right thing within this vehicle, within this junction? And if that's, that being the case and demonstrated, then, there's your license to drive. There are all kinds of conversations we could have about, taking that further with regards to further testing, graduated driving licenses, and the goals for driver education matrix, and etc., etc. But yeah, ultimately, I'm 100% in line with you that the driving test shouldn't be really too much of a consideration for us. It should be our pupils' consideration. We should be looking at an education process that takes them much further.
I love it. If there's any other questions, sorry if I've missed you out. I've been through that. I don't know where else I posted the post, but there's some
I think
great additional things there.
Gary Thomas asked me one.
Go on, let's have a look. Where's this one? Why do you hate whiskey so much?
Yeah, and I think my answer to that was he spelt Gary wrong.
Yeah, so we've got Gary Thomas. How's he? He's coming up on every episode. Gary, you need to get on and come and share your journey.
Yeah, get Gary on. He's a great listen. To be fair, yeah, you don't start the word Gary with a W, Gary. So why do you hate Gary so much? No, it's yeah. I missed out on a bottle of whiskey at the DIA conference because I decided to leave. I'd had enough of listening to people talking about their own agendas and not listening to mine. So I decided to go home. And
you needed a nap.
Yeah, I needed a nap. I was tired, and So I missed out on a bottle of whiskey, and then there's been a queue of people. It's so honestly, what a lovely industry that it is. That you will miss out on a bottle of whiskey, and there'll be 10 people queuing up to tell you that you've missed out on it out of the goodness of their heart, just to make sure that you're aware that you won a bottle of whiskey, but it's been given to someone else. Honestly, you know, you make of that what you will, but what a loving, caring industry we work in.
That's it. You've got people that care about you, Lee.
Yeah,
But there we go. I think that was all the other questions. See, I'd seen that there was a few bits on there, Mike. Right, we'll go there. So yeah, we've been through there. Loads of great questions. So thank you very much for that, everyone. That feature will be staying on the show for now, as long as we can get the recording done in time, or I'll limit the number of questions that I'm going to ask the guests. But Lee, thank you so much for chatting with me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure having you back on again.
thank you, Josh. I've enjoyed it. It's been really good.
Thank you.